Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Roadmap MBA. My name is Ashleigh King and I'm so delighted to be here today. So I am in the fabulous Roadmap MBA studio, which is in the Team Valley in Gateshead. In the northeast of England, and what amazes me is that the Roadmap MBA is now in over 33 countries. So, I've seen a map this morning of some of the amazing places that the Roadmap MBA is being sent to and shipped to, where people are studying this wonderful course. So I hope that if you haven't heard of the Roadmap MBA and you're just finding it for the first time today, you might want to take a look at it. It's a great way to make business more accessible and a more affordable business education, which is really valuable when we have rising costs and lots of things like that to worry about. Also, things can feel more competitive than ever as, the world becomes more global. So anyway, it's so great to be here. My name is Ashleigh King, so I've got a big screen behind me with some slides for you today. I'm going to be sharing some great topics, but I thought it might be useful to introduce myself for anyone who maybe hasn't met me before. So in March this year, 2022, I was kindly invited to guest present as a trial for Steve Pugh, who's the founder of Roadmap MBA. And thankfully he liked it, so he's kept me on. And so I get to come and present every fortnight, and I try to present different topics around things like, business education, because I completed an MBA, Masters in Business Administration at Newcastle University Business School. But I also like to talk about podcasting. I'm an entrepreneur. I work in the creative industries. I have my own business. I've made many mistakes in business. So I like to bring real world examples and also share theory, but also make it accessible for people. Because I think we can all learn in so many different ways. So I'm hopeful that this sharing my experience today around planning events and also some of the things that can go wrong in real life when events go wrong, this will hopefully add some value to you today. It's been about 8 weeks since I last presented one of these, so in that time lots has happened. So Steve went on holiday to the States, and that's one of the reasons why I wasn't presenting, and that was amazing because it was great to hear some of his journey, but also it's so important that he took some time off because he always works so hard. For me, what have I been up to? Well, I went to the podcast show at the end of May. I think I presented after that. I also have taken on my first production assistant at my studio Flamingo Heights, which is in the Oosburn in Gateshead. Sorry, Newcastle. Don't know, I'm getting confused on which side of the river I'm on this morning. But that has been an absolute game changer because it's only 8 hours a week and it's funded through a brilliant scheme called This Is Me, which is an agency to help people with neurodiversity access support that they need. But I'm hoping that in the future I'll be able to make him full-time. It's been so great to get on top of my emails, my finances, just lots of messages and things that I sometimes find overwhelming. So watch this space. We've been doing some great projects at Flamingo Heights, and I'm very excited to share that for anyone who watches me and some of my other content on Nurture Your Zest. I'm really excited to share that I'm actually creating content again. So I've recorded 6 episodes that are coming out soon. We've got some really great guests. We've talked about things from miscarriage to loneliness to men's mental health, racism, just all kinds of challenges that ordinary people face. And I think it will be useful, hopefully, and really valuable content when it's ready to come out. So I realized that I can't really tell people and train people about podcasting and how wonderful a medium it is if I'm not actually doing that myself. So it was really important to set an example and get back to creating and producing. And actually, the more I do that, the more energy I have in my work. So I would be interested to hear if anyone has a similar journey when they're busy, but they do something they love. It really gives them more energy. So if you're watching today, I don't know where you're watching from. You could be watching from anywhere in the world. Please do comment. We've got this going to YouTube, to LinkedIn, to Twitter, Facebook, all over the place. So if you want to say hi, I'll try and say hi if I can see it, if I can see your comment, but please do leave comments. Oh, great! I can see some already. I was looking on the wrong computer. This is such an amazing space behind the scenes. I'll have to share a little vlog sometime, because if you could see what I can see, I've got like so many different computers to look at. But yes, it sounds like there's a few people really excited to hear about the case study that I'm going to be looking at. So that's good. So I think those are all the introductions I wanted to make. I just wanted to say hi because it's been a while, but if you're watching in the comments, you know, do say hello. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be sharing with you. So today I'm going to be talking about ethics, particularly around engaging stakeholders. So it's going to be a study of social networks and also a real life case study of how you can deal with things, or what you can do when things go wrong, but also why it's so important for us to consider from the outset in any project we do, the ethics around it, the stakeholder engagement of the people who need to be involved in that, health and safety, all kinds of challenges. So I'm going to spill. So today I'm talking about the Fyre Festival. So for those of you who've not heard of the Fyre Festival, you'll know lots of it by the end of the day, because I'm going to be sharing some, some insights into this really interesting case study. And, when you do a Master's in Business Admin, an MBA, a lot of people, it's pretty standard that you get case studies. It's a great way to learn. You might look at things that businesses have done well or not so well, but often they can be quite boring, quite dry, and they, very typical, looking at cash flow projections and investor decisions and a whole bunch of different things. But this case study to me just blows my mind. I just find it so interesting looking at it from the perspective of psychology, sociology, the way society works, the way society is changing, the world of work and the challenges that can come up. It's a creative industry, so it's something that's really important to me. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I want to talk to you about today. So for those of you who don't know, just a very brief insight, the Fyre Festival is a festival that did take place in 2017. It actually wasn't successful. It sold a lot of tickets. It was created by Billy McFarland, who was an entrepreneur, and also the rapper Ja Rule. So we're going to go into a little bit more about that. It's a really interesting case study, and we won't have time to go into all of the detail and all of the goss on everything that happened, but there's some brilliant documentaries that I wanted to shout out about. So Netflix did a great documentary called Fyre, The Greatest Party That Never Happened. And there's also the Hulu documentary called Fyre Fraud. So I'd recommend checking those out. They're an easy watch. Actually, I wouldn't say they're easy, they're quite difficult to watch. I found myself cringing. It was really hard to actually get through it as someone who's organized events myself. I really found it difficult to watch it sometimes, but it's something that you can learn a lot and just be curious about psychology and humans and how we make decisions in business and under pressure. So because I want to talk about this from the perspective of a case study, I am going to be sharing some academic stuff. I'm going to be sharing some resources with you that I think will be useful if you're interested in this and you want to use it as your own case study or go and explore your learning further. I won't go too much into the depths of the academic content because I know that we've got people learning from all walks of life or listening from all walks of life, but I will share some resources that you can go and look into more. But as a basic place to start looking at it, I would look at these documentaries. Okay, so the themes that I'm going to look at today, I'm going to be looking at innovation and social networks. So we know that innovation is important, we hear about it all the time, but so are social networks. And we also know that the world is just expanding. We're getting to meet people from all over, and we have amazing communities that are coming together online. We have people who are coming together around particular topics and disciplines and interest groups. But at the same time, because we're so much on show and because there's so much video and because people have social media, when things go wrong, they can really go drastically wrong. So in the past, if say something happened that was bad and maybe you were the organizer of a festival, you maybe might have had more access to press or contacts and the time opportunities to perhaps fix your reputation or correct things or watch what is released and what goes out. However, now what we have is a challenge where information is so fast and people interpret information in so many different ways that what we might think is a great way to do damage control or crisis management can actually be perceived in a totally different way. So it means that more than ever, our crisis comms teams, our PR teams, they need to be on it. And there's some really poor examples in this case study of things that were done by the Fyre Festival team and in this documentary where actually people's points of view were manipulated, their thoughts were deleted. So we're going to go through a lot of that today. We're going to talk about community engagement. It's something that's really important to me. So we're looking at stakeholder engagement generally, but also community engagement. Now that comes into creating shared value. So when we do something, we should have a win-win for the communities that we are working with. So we talk about ecology. So ecology is where you have something that creates a scenario where everybody gets the best out of it. We're talking about corporate engagement. So how do we motivate our staff? How do we communicate with them? How do we share messages? How do we listen to their feedback and respond to that? We're also going to be talking about employee engagement. So just to backtrack a bit, I got those two confused. Sorry. Corporate engagement, we'll be talking about our investors, our founders, our, the message we want to put out in the world. But the employee engagement will be about the teams that we look after and lead. So we're also going to be talking about high reliability situations and moral dilemmas. What do you do when you need to choose one thing over the other? What do you do when you've invested all of your money, but actually you can't deliver what you promised? So these are some of the things we're going to be talking about today, and I'm so excited to get stuck into it. I'd love to see where you're from. I'd love to hear, who's listening. So please do say hi in the comments. It'd be great to see you. So we've got some interesting comments coming in about how much it's harder to create a narrative, with social media now and social media everywhere. So individuals have so much power. So that is absolutely true. So more than ever, we need to be mindful of what we're putting out, but also, are we doing things as a businesses that are in line with our vision and our values? And for many people, we can get distracted from our vision and our values, particularly when we're stressed, when we don't have time to think about those things. It can feel like a luxury when you're trying to cope with something. So why this topic? I just wanted to say, for me, I've chosen this topic today because I am someone who has organized festivals. I've done, big programs that have been around community engagement and stakeholder engagement, and I've made lots of mistakes myself. I've been on the edge of difficult conversations. I've had to, negotiate and navigate some experiences that I never thought I would need to. And so when I watched the documentary back in 2019, I just, as I said before, I cringed watching this because I could see how this had actually happened. I could see how different steps had been taken to try and fix things, and I could see the breaks in the chain of where things were going wrong. But everything's better when you watch it from the outside. Imagine being in this situation in real life. So for me, I think this is a really important thing. If ever you go into organizing any event, this is such a great case study to look at, to see what type of things can go wrong, but why simple things like water and shelter and food are so vital when we're in charge of looking after events or looking after people or making sure that they're safe. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this today. Okay, so would you go to this festival? Would you buy a ticket? So looking at this lovely image behind me, we have a beautiful, jet skis and water, and it's in the Bahamas, and there's pigs you can swim with, and there's supermodels, and, it was just, the promotional campaign that they used was fantastic. And I'm going to share a little bit about their marketing strategy generally in a few minutes. But just looking at the festival from the outside in. So would you buy a ticket to a festival with gourmet food made by celebrity chefs, with amazing art and music and a really unique experience? What about things like, a beautiful island in the Bahamas where Pablo Escobar actually had been? There's all this intrigue and, mystery around this. What about luxury accommodation, or VIP passes, or the opportunity to meet and greet and hang out with influencers and models, supermodels at that, So one of the things that you'll find if you go to festivals, I'm a huge festival fan, is that often there are about 180,000 people or 80,000 people. So if you're one of 8,000 people on a tiny private island, there is an actual chance that you might speak to an influencer or a supermodel or someone that you look up to. So if you know your favorite band's going and they're playing at an event like this, wouldn't you buy a ticket? Isn't that something you do? I know I might be tempted, especially having looked at the earlier promotional imagery. It's a really good question. So the prices for this festival started at about $1,500, but most people were spending about $4,000, and that went up to $250,000 depending on which package they went for. Now that's interesting to me because what was happening there is that people were buying, extra passes. They were loading up cash on their wallets because they were trying to make it a cashless event, because actually they'd run out of money and they needed a way to generate income. And if you think about it, it's a super smart way to get more cash. Create a cashless wallet, get people to load up before they come. You get a cash influx and you can give them free booze in a sense. But what that meant is that people were, paying all this money, and what were they paying for? And when you look at what actually happened, it's pretty crazy. So in terms of would you buy this ticket to this festival, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to know. I think I probably would have been interested. I want to come back a second to innovation and how it can drive engagement. So we're going to look at something called social network theory. Now I'm going to try not to get too deep in this stuff, but just to let you know some of the themes around this, so that if you are an MBA student, or if you're a learner, a lifelong learner, and you want to go and explore some of the themes around this, you can. So some of the questions I had watching that documentary is, has social media changed the landscape? Does openness and interconnectedness pose a risk for our society and for our businesses, for our organizations? What are the ethical concerns around innovation, but also around social network theory? So if we look at social network theory and social media, we're looking at the formation and social capital, the rise of influencers. So there is somebody called Granovetter. In 1973, he wrote a brilliant article that I really like and enjoy, and it's called The Strength of Weak Ties, and it's very much around networks. And I would highly recommend for anyone who is in business to read that paper, or even, there's a lot of resources out there that talks about his principles on networks. But the idea is that we all have weak ties, and they all matter. So for instance, it could be someone you went to kindergarten with, or you went to school with, or maybe you used to play in the same rugby team, or you speak to at the supermarket every day. Those people will all have their own networks, and they might know somebody that you know, or maybe that you need to know in the future. So what I would say there is, this is a useful paper to understand how you can use your network to expand your opportunities, to expand and learn, to gain value from another network that you don't have access to right now. And so the reason I'm talking about strong ties and weak ties is you can nurture those and then they can become stronger and it can help you to access new things. Now, if we talk about that in the context of work and in the context of the Fyre Festival, well, what happens is companies can actually access a follower's weak ties. So if we are marketing to somebody, and we want to get them excited about our festival, and we want to get them excited about a campaign, we want them to buy tickets and support our festival, what we can do as a company is we can actually exploit those weak ties of the people who are such wonderful fans and get them excited, get them engaged. And you see this all the time in simple ways. For instance, hey, like and comment and share this video and you can get entered into my giveaway, or tag the person you want to come on a date to Lumley Castle with, or, you know, those sorts of activities. So that is a way that companies can and do use marketing to exploit people's weak ties. Now, in the case of the Fyre Festival, they do so much around this. So if you go and watch, you'll see how they manipulated data. They recycled people's, you know, addresses, email addresses that they had not been given permission to use, and they sold tickets to them. They, you know, encouraged people to bring their friends, to share things. And one of the things they did was they had a really powerful Instagram strategy, which we're going to look at. It's really interesting to see some of the comments coming in. Yes, so there's some questions about businesses, festivals maybe needing to overmarket. Yes, so this is something that happens a lot. We need to sell tickets, and you never feel like you're going to ever sell enough tickets. So even if you have a capacity of 8,000 people, you may not actually be able to sell that. So in the case of the Fyre Festival, they did sell out on all their tickets. The problem is they were selling something that didn't exist. So right from the outset, they couldn't deliver on that. But the issue that we have here is that a lot of the information that was shared between marketing teams and production teams wasn't actually communicated, because things went through Billy McFarland, the entrepreneur, the founder. And so he's, you know, a really interesting case study in general, but he didn't have the experience of being a festival director. This festival was arranged with 8 weeks out, an entirely new team. They sacked many team members. You know, the journey of the organization, it exploded. You know, they were making new hires all the time, but it is not. It has not been conducted in a safe way. Things like business continuity were never considered. So we're going to get into that a bit more, but just to kind of recap there and finish that bit off, companies do exploit and use our weak ties, and it can be a very powerful strategy, but it's something we need to think about from an ethical viewpoint. What is the moral questions we have about that? And that's why it's important to be careful of data and data protection as well. So there are some comments saying that all of the signs were showing that this was going to be a disaster. And you know what? That is true. And still, there could have been opportunities to salvage this. So it is something for us to think about. So if we look at ethics and social media for a few minutes, I did want to say, so you've got new legislation now from the Federation and Trade Commission, FTC, which is in the States, which is unreported endorsements. So you actually need to be careful about what you endorse, what you say. So you see this a lot now, and I used to work in universities, so I know, for instance, if we had said in the past that it's going to be, you know, we have X amount of students and this is their satisfaction score, or this is the subject score for this, more than ever, ranking tables or evidence or proof of actually achieving those things are really valid, because what you could happen is you might buy a ticket for something, or you might go to university, or you may have some experience, but then if it's not what you expect and you want to refund or you want to question that, and then light is shone on actually, well, only this % of students have passed the course, or this % of students have a customer satisfaction score of something, you know, that can really be something that can can create problems later. So more than ever, we need to be mindful about what we're actually marketing, what we're saying, what our evidence base is for that. And that's why impact data has become so important for organizations, whether small or large. We also spoke, when you have online forums, you need to actually have an opportunity for people to be anonymous if they wish, if they want to give feedback, survey feedback, allow people to give and respond to information in a way that feels right for them. But data and protecting data and using email addresses and things carefully is a huge thing that we need to look at. So in the case of the Fyre Festival, as I mentioned before, they actually recycled people's email addresses and recycled their data to keep selling them tickets. So what they had is they'd had this, all these fun parties that they'd been arranging around New York and all over at other places, and so they just kept selling them things using that same data. Sometimes you could think, well, actually they were interested in this, so why wouldn't they be interested in this amazing festival? But if you're not giving somebody the opportunity to opt out or to say they don't want that information, you could be putting yourself at massive risk. This is something I chat to people about all the time, actually. A lot of people in small businesses that I talk to don't realize how important it is to follow the guidance of the Information Commissioner's Office. Because we think that we are small businesses, it might not affect us. Well, actually it does, and you can get fined. So be careful if you're organizing any events or even in your own day-to-day practices, to use the information and the data of the people that you're working with in a way that's okay with them, but also that you've actually said you're going to use it. So one of the things that was a huge issue around the Fyre Festival is that Billy McFarland, the founder, and the rest of the marketing teams, he actually advised his teams to start deleting comments, to start protecting the flow of information that was going out. And actually, from a crisis comms point of view, I can see why you would do that. You don't want people to be panicking. You don't want people to be worried about what's going on. You don't want, when you've had all these investors who've invested into your project, to pull out. So what had happened is that the promises they had made were not possible to deliver. And what that meant is that for the people who were coming, they had paid all this money. They were promised a cashless festival. They now had no cash. They were stranded on an island. What were they supposed to do? There was nobody to help them and organize them. There were some core staff members who were doing their absolute best to try and salvage the situation. But the person who was in charge, who was funding all of this and winning investment, was actually in a situation where he was, his day-to-day tasks were to raise millions of money that morning because he had payments that needed to go out that day. And it's such a crazy situation because he couldn't actually lead that project because he was fundraising and trying to pay off bills. He needed people under him, but what he was doing was he was sacking staff for disagreeing, for being negative. And so he only wanted to be surrounded by people who would say yes, who would say, I've got the solution. And this was a massive problem. So one of the things that we know is a huge issue around ethics and social media is the transparency of information. So if you are someone who's a small business, or if you run a marketing channel or a social media account, it's actually better to have your complaints there. It's better to have negative feedback, but to engage with that person and to reply in a positive way, because often those people will become your greatest supporters if you are able to listen to them and solve the problem for them. A lot of people just want to be listened to. However, in this instance, the campaign was completely fabricated from the outset. So people were angry and had every right to be. Okay, so their goal was to sell, and this is in Billy McFarland's words, a pipe dream to the average loser. And this, to me, just speaks so much about motives and just this idea that it's something I want to just reflect on for a minute. The world is changing. It's becoming, we have so much going on, and we watch our Instagram, we look at things, we look at supermodels, we look at people we're inspired by, we look at people we feel motivated by and connected to. And so you look at this lovely picture of these gorgeous women, you know, supermodels. You had Bella Hadid, you had, you know, Hailey, I need to call her Hailey Bieber, but I guess that is her name. Hailey Baldwin. You had all these amazing supermodels who went and they were used in this influencer marketing campaign. They paid a lot of money, and they actually, you know, paid these models to just hang around on yachts and drink, and they, you know, have a party, and they did these fabulous promotional videos with a view that that would bring in lots of people, it would get people really excited. But actually that's not what was happening, because they didn't even know if those influencers would come, if they would even attend. They did have some smaller tier influencers, but supermodels weren't expecting to come. So what they did is they actually manipulated people using their insecurities against them. And that to me is just really not ethical. But we see it all the time. Companies do that to us, you know. We talk about the pink tax with women, for instance. It's like, you know, how do we get women to buy more things? Well, it's like, you know, we'll make it pink, and we'll use that, use their gender to get them to buy more. So they were using people's insecurities. You know, if I go to this festival, I can hang out with these beautiful people, and I'll feel beautiful, and I'll feel special. And so they had a really smart targeting approach for marketing. And I just wanted to just mention that, because I just think it's so clever. So what they did is they got people to use these little orange squares. So the Fyre Festival branding was orange. And what they did is they got 400 in-demand influencers, particularly those with 1 million followers or more, to all post at the same time an orange square on Instagram with the hashtag Fyre Festival, not much more information, and tag the Fyre Festival account. And what happened is Instagram was flooded with all these orange squares, and people were like, what is going on? And so that's really, really interesting. So what they found is with that little red square, the festival received 300 views in 24 hours, and the tickets sold out in 48 hours. And Kendall Jenner was paid approximately $250,000 to $350,000 for one Instagram post about this orange square, this orange tile. So it just goes to show that when you use someone who's so influential like that, you know, you can actually get lots of results. But for me, this whole campaign was completely unethical, because what they were saying was that you can come, you can hang out with these influencers, you can, you know, you can be one of us, but they weren't actually giving that. So there's some really interesting comments coming in. If you've seen the Fyre Festival, please do share them with us. So, you know, it's really, I think someone's asked if I'm an artist. I don't know if you mean me or someone on the screen I'm talking about, but I'm not an artist. No, I'm a podcaster and a trainer, and I run my own business. So yeah, I think that's something that I wanted to share. So I would love to hear any comments or thoughts around ethics in social media and what they did and what you thought, because I think to summarize that part is, you know, to delete comments, to restrict information to people who are paying customers is really, really unethical. I wanted to focus on engagement. So engagement covers quite a lot of different things. We're going to look at stakeholder engagement generally. Okay, so when we look at stakeholder engagement, there are so many people in your life every day that come into purpose when it comes to engagement. So for instance, you know, it could be the cleaner on your way to work. As you're walking in, say hi to them. You know, those are what we would call weak ties, where perhaps you might need something, and actually you can contact them and say, hey, I really need this thing. I've got an important client. Can you help me? And I've been in that situation many times. It could be saying hello to a member of the board of directors where you work. I've actually seen people who've gone for promotions and they haven't been successful. And when they got their feedback and they asked why they didn't get the job over another candidate, when they were actually very technically capable, it was because they wouldn't look at senior management in the eye, and they were so shy and scared, and actually that meant that they couldn't express themselves. And when you are in senior positions, you need to be able to talk to people from all walks of life. You need to be able to win their support and be able to motivate and influence people. So that's just a little bit generally about stakeholder engagement. You've got lots of people in your life, so have a think yourself and think, who are the people I come into contact with, and are they people that I work with? Are they people that I could work with, or that in some way we might do something together? One of my favorite books on that topic is actually How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's a really, really powerful book on how to be better at connections. So we're coming back to looking at the Fyre Festival. I wanted to focus on community engagement. So this festival, as I mentioned, when I said it was created in 8 weeks, that's because they were originally going to be having the festival on a private island. And what actually happened was, because it was affiliated with Pablo Escobar, the owners who had leased that property had said that was not to be discussed under any circumstances. And what Billy did, Billy McFarlane, the founder of Fyre Festival, is he actually released that in the promotional video and basically made this whole thing about you can come to this festival and you can be in this space. So they actually pulled his opportunity to stay there, and they no longer let them stay at the festival space that was originally envisioned. So what that meant is they had all of these people who'd bought all of these tickets, and now they had to find a new festival site. They had 8 weeks to do that. They had to build the site. They didn't have any plans around safety, logistics, plumbing, all of these things. And so they had their work cut out for them big time. And what we find here is that if you look at the documentaries, I mean, it's absolutely crazy some of the challenges that the staff went through. But I want to focus here for a moment on the communities that were surrounding the space. So they had promised the attendees or the festival goers a private island. This is not a private island. It was actually Exuma in the Bahamas, and what that is a place where people live. There are communities there, and people were actually taken advantage of. They needed workers to build, they needed things to be done, and they wanted it to be done quickly. So what they did is they actually worked with local communities to get things done. They asked for their help, they somehow persuaded them, but they promised that they would get paid. What they did is they said they would pay them after the event. So what you had is you had communities and builders and construction groups that were from the local community who all picked up their tools and they came to try and help. And so they were excited. This was a great festival. They were going to be getting lots of money and be paid for it. Their work was going to be seen, but there was no money. So what kept happening is Billy kept writing checks or writing drafts or saying the checks in the mail, or this is coming soon. And for these communities, because they'd agreed to get paid afterwards, they were one of the people who were actually not even considered in that big mess of all of the money that he needed to pay. So what happened is these people were exploited, these communities were exploited. And this is another issue that we find. But if you look at things like history, if you look at social justice, if you look at the ways that sometimes in the Western world we can take advantage of other communities, if we look at the Caribbean and its history of colonialism, I don't want to get too much into that today, but it is not fair for us to, just go to communities and holiday there and just be tourists, but then not be mindful of the people that are actually living there. And this is something that you see all the time in the tourism industry. So these nations were actually used to being exploited. And a lot of behavior went on that shouldn't have. You had 200 workers who were working day and night, so they had teams who were working day and night to try and get things done, but it was an impossible task. So we're talking about 8,000 people who bought tickets to come to an island that's not a private island. It's actually a functioning island with other people around. They've been promised grand accommodation, and none of this is prepared, none of this is done. So a lot of the vendors and suppliers were actually forced to pay their own money towards bills and supplies and materials that they never got back. So many organizations do actually consider their duty of care in the communities around them. So for those of you who are studying MBAs, I would look at Porter and Kramer and their concepts around creating shared value, and also looking at things like, corporate social responsibility. So rather than just thinking of how great it looks in a glossy PR campaign, many organizations will look at what they can do to support the communities around them. But in this case, the community was just a vehicle, it was a tool, it was materials. So they actually looked at them as human resource in that way. They were the people who were on the ground building and getting things done. So one example I wanted to focus on, which really highlighted for me how difficult this festival had been for the communities there, is there was a restaurant owner called Marianne Rull. She ran the Exuma Point Bar and Grill, and she was brought in 1 week before the festival. She worked around the clock. She hired a team of 10 people. She had to prepare no less than 1,000 meals a day in the lead up to the festival and during the festival, but remembering you had 8,000 people coming. She lost her own money. So as a business owner, she had to put her own materials and ingredients in, and she lost $50,000 in her savings and her reputation. She was never ever paid by Billy McFarland even later. However, she did receive some compensation after the documentary was shared on Netflix. People felt really moved by her story. For me, what really is really jarring looking at her story is how much her reputation was tarnished by the actions of someone else, and how in good faith she had been persuaded to work to get paid after the festival. For her, this was an opportunity to, impress people that might lead to bigger work. And this is something that I just wanted to highlight is a huge problem for us sometimes in the creative industries, or in where we look at many people getting asked to do something for free, for exposure. We call it hope labor. So if you ever look at any research journals or paperwork around that, it's called hope labor. But this idea that, she was going to just be able to fix everything. Now, what was interesting to me is she was brought on because their fancy, celebrity chefs were promised around 6 million. And actually, they didn't have the budget for that anymore. So that's why they cut the catering, because they only had 1 million flagged for catering. But that 1 million was never paid to Marianne. So it's a really, crazy example of how important budgets are, and how important checking our budgets are, as we proceed with a project. So just to flag some resources here that you can go and look into more around organizational culture. So we've got innovative and risk-taking culture, which you can look at, which is O'Reilly, Chapman, and Caldwell. We also have power culture, so Handy's 4 classes of organizational culture, which has also been looked at by Riley. So those are 2 resources that I would encourage you to look at if you are studying and want to know more about this. So if we think of leadership, what does successful leadership look like? What is that going to be? So being able to read your team, acknowledging people as well as their ideas, building teams that challenge or question the status quo, surrounding yourself with expert teams, listening and empowering employees, and being honest and telling the truth, and in this instance, being clear with your investors. So that might be what success and leadership success in this instance might look like. And in the case of stakeholder engagement, which we just talked about, that success might look like meeting with your stakeholders around you, asking the communities what they would like to be involved in, rather than hiring in talent from outside the area, asking them to work with you and seeing what you can do to help their communities. Paying properly and compensating for time up front as well, so that you can cover materials and people aren't actually put out having to do that. So what does leadership failure look like then as a contrast? And it can be creating a reality distortion field. So in this case with the Fyre Festival, what you had happen is Billy McFarlane, the founder, had, he says it now himself, you know, he had a huge ego. He just wanted to achieve. He just wanted to achieve against all odds. He believed he could do it. He had blind faith that everything was just going to work. And that was just how it was and how it is. And there was no point where he thought, I can't do this. He just believed that if he had the right attitude, the right people around him, he had blind faith he could do it. I've been in a similar situation myself at times when I was organising the TEDx Newcastle University event during COVID and we had to cancel. I didn't want to cancel, so I wanted to somehow make it COVID safe, and I wanted to do all kinds of different things, and I spent all my time trying to make sure that it could happen, but I couldn't because we were in a national lockdown and there was just no way. And when I did look into that later, I still created the conference, but in a different way. But I still made speculative decisions around ticket sales that I actually didn't have the information for. So watching the documentary and looking at this case study had me thinking, wow, I can actually see how some of those decisions were made. He just really believed he could do it. But actually, when we think we can just do something, it's probably where we most need people around us who can check us, who can give us facts, and who can, you know, help us to see sense. So what happened in this case, because McFarlane actually cut away anyone who didn't agree with him, he created a reality distortion. He wasn't seeing the truth. He wasn't seeing what was real. Nothing was real anymore. It was just about, you know, what he could do to get things done and to get this finished. So when we have blind positivity in workplaces, when we have people who are just yes people, or they're not able to express how they feel or what they think, you know, when we don't have teams talking together from one team to another, it creates huge issues. And so maybe one of the things that would have changed or helped people to decide if this festival was actually going to happen would have been on the ground updates from people, you know, using social media, showing them what was going on. They had really tremendous challenges with things that they weren't expecting, like a huge thunderstorm moving locations, but a lot of that could have been preempted with better planning. So when you have a situation where people can't voice their solutions, where people can't say, you know, what they think, where you have people who can't bring you problems, they can only bring you solutions, that idea actually gets misportrayed. So when you say you're a solution-focused organization, that does not mean that you don't see problems. It does not mean everything's always rosy. But what it might mean is that you encourage your team to feel empowered to look at a situation and think, this is really difficult. These are the things we could do. I can prepare a briefing note of how we can fix this, and I can take that to my CEO, or I can take that to the person I'm working with. So solution-focused approach isn't actually a bad thing. It is when you cut away any opportunity for anyone to bring a problem or bring something to your attention of your CEO. So not listening to the team is a huge flag for failure and for success. You know, the success of a project. You need to be able to hear different people's perspectives, different people's voices, because we all interpret and experience things in such different ways. So what they did in the Fyre Festival was they sacrificed their own values and their organizational values for the success, to make sure it went ahead. But they actually lost their transparency with their customers, with their shareholders, investors, with their, you know, their staff, their teams, and with the communities. So to look at employee engagement, we have some wonderful people here, and if you watch the Netflix documentary, you'll get to see some of them. Some of the things that some of these employees had to do or were asked to do are just absolutely horrific. I'm not actually going to say some of them because I'm on YouTube and I don't want this to be flagged, but watch the documentaries and you'll see what I mean. But they ran out of water, for example, and that is such a key thing that you'll need if you're running a festival. Even for one day, I've heard of festivals running out of water, but to be running a festival that's a multi-day festival where you need the ability, even if you don't have to shower because you've got the sea right there, you still need to be able to run toilets, wash hands. There's a lot of health and safety matters around that when you have that volume of people together. People get dehydrated, they're out in the sun, so water is really key. But in this instance, they actually weren't able to get their water, and they asked one of their staff to do something really inappropriate to actually gain that water. So what I would say is watch the documentary and you'll see. But this is a really good example of how not to treat your employees. You had lots of team members who weren't able to meet each other or talk to each other, or they had to go through different systems or around the houses with certain things. And that was to protect information being shared, but with that information and with better planning and better teamwork, they could have actually tackled some of those issues. So the expectations for the staff as well as the attendees had been that there was going to be these gorgeous supermodels and this wonderful thing. So you've got staff who are really energized and excited, who are marketing, saying this is happening, we're going to have the most wonderful event. You know, they're sharing things on their marketing channels and their social media in good faith that this is what they're actually expecting. But the people on the ground, the production teams, are saying we need to cancel this festival, it's not safe, people are going to be turning up, they're not going to be have anything to eat, we need to protect your reputation. And they at the same time didn't want to be blamed for all of these failings that were none of their fault. Imagine being on an organizing team where you brought in 8 weeks before a festival to somehow make things happen when you've got no resources, you're having to wait for checks to be signed off. It was absolutely crazy. So one case study I wanted to point out to you is Mark Weinstein. He is a music festival consultant, so he's worked on festivals before. And for him, he felt like his luck had changed. He felt like this was the opportunity to be surrounded by some of the best names in music. Don't forget that this whole festival was associated with Ja Rule, the rapper, who had all kinds of industry connections. You had bands like Blink-182 playing. You know, he was really excited about this, and he had lots of festival organizing experience. In Mark's case, he actually did push against Billy in many occasions, and he said, I actually think we need to cut the influencers. The influencers are coming for free. You know, yes, it will hurt your reputation, yes, it will upset people, but if you cut these influencers and you take away their free accommodation, which we don't have to give them, we will be able to reclaim some of the funds back, we'll be able to create alternative things. And every time he came up with something that was a concern, it was rejected. There were other emails that he wasn't copied into, so he was kept from information. And he's actually one of the people who, if you watch the documentaries, is actually still on the ground trying to make sure that people are safe, that they're able to get flights, that they're able to get home, that they're able to get food, even though they had no resources themselves. However, their founder and the person who was in charge, Billy, was nowhere to be seen. And he wasn't able to face the communities and the stakeholders who were involved. And I think that says a lot for Mark, that he was actually able to stand up in that situation and just do everything he could to help. It really broke my heart watching that and seeing staff be treated in that way. You know, it's a really interesting look at how someone can cope in very difficult times. So if you want to look at anything around resilience or around what helps somebody to get through a time like that and still care about people around them, I would highly recommend looking at that. When we think about employee engagement, but also looking at community engagement, or even if we think about the people who were coming to this festival, we all have needs. So if we look at, you know, a very traditional model for MBA students, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we look at this and we see psychological needs are at the bottom. So the basic needs that a human will have is food and water and shelter. So if you're creating a festival where you actually don't have enough accommodation, you don't have enough food, you don't have enough resources, but you've also promised them a cashless festival. They've given you the money, they've got no way to gain access to any of those resources. You also have got them drunk and asked them to wait for several hours before they were allowed to go into a festival. You've got people who are confused, who are lost, who are potentially not safe. There's no lighting, there's no way to see things. You had, so they actually were promised really luxury accommodation, and what they were given instead is disaster relief tents. So FEMA tents left over from hurricanes, and that's just not what they were promised at all. So we've got belongingness, love needs, esteem needs, self-actualization. All of those things are important, but unless you have your basic psychological needs and your safety needs, you can't be happy. So from a point of view of the influencers or the people who were attending or that kind of thing, they needed to have basic needs like being safe. But from the perspective of an employee, they needed those things too, and they were actually giving up their resources, some of them working, you know, days and days around the clock without any sleep to try and help all these people because they felt that was their job and that's what they'd been hired to do, but they hadn't even been paid. For them, you know, what was the incentive to keep going? It's really fascinating. And actually what really surprised me is looking at all of this, if you think of self-actualization, was to help one person's goal, and that was Billy's, of, you know, his ego, his dream, and meeting all of that. So I think it's a really interesting thing to look at. We won't have time to look at this now, but I want you to explore this if you're interested. So Gueston, Conway and Maguire looked at employee engagement and looking at a psychological contract. So we have psychological contracts in our day-to-day life, in any relationships we have, whether it's with someone in a supermarket or someone in our family. But a psychological contract is an unspoken contract. It's a way of seeing the world, and it's a way of being in the world. So it's a way that we can have certain expectations around interactions we'll have, and certain things will happen where in a psychological contract it makes us feel unsafe, and it means that we want to tear away from something. And so this is so important, because what might be something that actually affects one person in an organization or as an employee or you know, as a person in their ordinary life might not affect someone else. And that's because we all have different values and beliefs, and we filter information in different ways because we have our different experiences. So if you look at psychological contract, the people in this situation, the employees in this situation, they were not safe. They did not have the psychological safety that they needed to do their jobs. They couldn't speak, they couldn't share their thoughts and ideas, and so that's really, really important. So I just wanted to point you towards a really useful tool for health and safety considerations when you organize events. So this is Booker who shared this. So they didn't do things like basic things like assessing the suitability of your venue. If a festival normally is planned a year out, sometimes 2 years out, really 8 weeks, how is that possible? So looking at capacity, access, hazards, facilities, so water, you know, can you get water? What about waste? What about toilets? What about sewage? You know, how do you carry, you need to carry out a risk assessment, and that needs to be checked regularly. So crowd management, weather, environment, catering. And I would also say, if you ever in this situation or you need to organize something, always have a crisis communications plan and plan for anything that you possibly could that can go wrong, so that you've got created statements and plans for different things should you need them, especially as we said earlier that there isn't much time now to wait around. With social media, people want responses now, and they want to know what's going on, so you really need to plan for that information. Creating an emergency plan, having an on-site emergency response, having enough first aiders, having enough fire safety people, having enough people to marshal crowds if you need to. You need to be able to handle casualties as well. So in the Fyre Festival documentary, you'll see the lights go out and there's just not enough lights, and you've got people who are drunk, who are tired, who don't know where to go, fighting, and it becomes a situation where people are looting for resources because their basic needs are not being met, and actually it became a very scary situation. So there are some, really messed up things around health and safety with this. You've got things like they had this wonderful digital marketing strategy and all these great things, but you also had people pulling out at the last minute. Big artists like Blink-182 saying, I can't deliver the expectations of what I needed to have. I don't have the equipment I need. They didn't have people giving the artists the information that they needed. When people arrived, as I mentioned, they were using hurricane tents. They also were promised gourmet food by celebrity chefs, and they were given cheese sandwiches. And even those cheese sandwiches were painstakingly created by members of the local community who didn't have the resources to give them those cheese sandwiches, but they were just in a horrendous, impossible situation. So imagine being a supplier, being someone who's creating these sandwiches at the last minute. You've spent all these resources, and then you've also got people who are complaining about the customer service. It's really so much could have been done with better preparation. Another thing to look at, we won't have time to go into it today, but high reliability culture, Robert Stout and Halpern. So you look at systems, process, human factors and errors, and how that can work in an organization. And I wanted to point out around personality. So Billy McFarland has been called a narcissist. He's been called arrogant. He's been told, or it's been said, that he has a history of fraud. He's actually now been given a sentence for fraud. So for a wire transfer issue. So he was constantly fraudulently wiring transfers. We know that he misused people's data in recycling email addresses that he did not have their permission for to use. He didn't take any responsibility or remorse. I have heard some interviews with him since where he seems to show remorse, but and sometimes even sounds a bit teary, but it sounds a little bit contrived personally. That's my personal opinion. He never said no. He had unrealistic expectations, and if people didn't agree with him, he just put his foot down and kicked them out of the team or out of the project. And so people were not psychologically safe around him. So whether you agree with his management style or not, he had a dream and he really wanted to reach that dream, but he never actually did. I mean, he hurt his reputation, he hurt a lot of people, he hurt his employees, he hurt communities, and he hurt his ticket holders and his attendees. So in conclusion, to look at this case study, for me, it was a really valuable experience watching those documentaries, thinking about all the themes that we've chatted about today. The world is changing. We know this with social media technology, so quick at our hands and our fingertips, and it's so powerful and it can be really, really useful. But it's also remembering that with any social networks or with anything we do, with power comes responsibility. I think that's a Batman quote. I think so. Organizations have a duty of care to their employees, their investors and their communities. Communication is key. We need to be able to communicate with people. Leaders should be held to account by a board of directors. So what could have happened in this state is if there were milestones, if there were project plans, if there were paper trails, if there were audit, sometimes bureaucracy and paperwork isn't necessary, but in this case, having a risk assessment, would really have helped. Contracts are really important because they outline the terms of agreement. So in this case, where people felt that their work contract or their supply agreement was violated, often those were gentlemen's agreements and they were just said and promised, but promises don't always actually transpire to real tangible outcomes. So in this case, having clear contracts would have been better. And small mistakes have the power to undermine an organization, but when they add up and when they are, not factual, and when information is protected, it has the power to become a huge catalyst that actually can really rupture an organization, and a lot of that can be avoided with better transparency. So that's me for today. Thank you so much for watching. It was great to have you guys here and to see some of the comments. This was a really interesting case study to look at. If you like this case study format, if you want me to do a different topic, if you want me to cover anything in particular around business education, MBA content, or like I say, just case studies. Let me know what you like, because then I can better deliver it. So I'm going to see you in 2 weeks. I can't wait. I love these sessions. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon.